I still thought that I was different. I still thought that I didn't qualify. And I believe that is because of the stigma, because I thought that if I were to finally accept that I was an alcoholic, that I would also be saying that I was a failure, that I was a bad person, that I was hopeless. And then when I actually came to understand what an alcoholic truly was, that it wasn't any of those things that society, the stereotypes have deemed to be the case. It's not the case at all. It couldn't be further from the truth in many ways. I thought to myself, more people need to know about this. More people need to feel like they are safe to be able to step out from behind the smile, because I truly believe that so many of us are hiding behind this smile.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to another episode of I Love Being Sober, sponsored by Camelback Recovery, Arizona's preferred mental health and addiction treatment option to help newcomers on their path to recovery. If that's you or someone you know, then you're in the right place. Because my name is Tim Westbrook, and I'm the CEO and founder of Camelback Recovery, here in the always sunny and always sober Phoenix, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have helped thousands of people to stop their suffering and continue on their path to recovery. Today, I'm here with Ash Butterss. She is a holistic transformation coach and creator of Behind the Smile, a recovery podcast designed to expose and remove the stigma around mental health, trauma, and addiction. After making the decision to get sober in 2020, Ash set out on a mission, quitting her corporate job and diving deeply into the world of self-development and recovery. Her mission is to smash through the stereotype that surrounds addiction and to help people live a fulfilled life connected to their purpose. Today, Ash works with people, helping them to realize their full potential by stepping out from behind the smile and creating a meaningful life connected to their purpose. As a trained yoga and meditation practitioner, Ash takes on a holistic approach to transforming the mind, body, and spirit. Ash, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thank you for that warm welcome. That was lovely.
Yes, it's awesome to have you here, and I love your accent. Where are you from?
Thank you. I live in Melbourne, Australia.
Awesome. And we were talking about the beach earlier, so you're close to the beach. You get to walk along the beach.
I am, yes. Even though I live in Melbourne, which is at the bottom half of Australia, it can be quite cool here in the wintertime. We also get extremely hot summers, and we're coming into spring now. So it's starting to warm up a little bit, and I live probably a 5-minute walk from the ocean. So I always try and get down there in the mornings. I take my little dog, I catch up with one of my friends, and we get to sort of connect and get that beautiful movement, that beautiful sunlight, and it's a great way to start the day.
Okay, amazing. We're going to talk about your morning routine. I want to hear more about your morning routine.
Yeah.
We'll get there, but not yet. First, we're going to talk about Behind the Smile. What is Behind the Smile, and what inspired you to create it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Behind the Smile is, as you mentioned, the recovery podcast that I created because I was really determined to smash through this stigma around addiction. For me, I got sober on the 24th of February, 2020. And it took me probably the best part of a decade to actually get into recovery. I'd been out there crashing and bashing for many, many years. I started drinking at the age of 12. And I have to say that my relationship with alcohol from that very first drink was unhealthy. I drank to blackout. I always wanted more. One was never enough. I was never satiated. And that was really the way that my drinking flowed throughout my life. So as I mentioned, there were telltale signs from a really, really early age. However, I would always deny the fact that I could possibly be an alcoholic because I didn't identify with the stereotype. Now, we all know the stereotype, don't we? It's the person under the bridge with the brown paper bag. And I wasn't that. I wasn't any of those things. In fact, through different maladaptive behaviors that I had latched onto throughout childhood, I'd become really good at hiding behind a smile. And the version of me that I presented to everybody else looked really together. It looked really shiny. I'll give you some examples. I was working for L'Oreal. I was a national sales manager. I was flying all around the world. Paris, New York, like everywhere you could imagine. That was what my life looked like in 2019, months before getting sober, at the height of my addiction. I was married. I owned my own home. I lived in Bondi Beach, which is one of the most expensive places to live in the world. And yet I felt like I was dying on the inside. And when I finally came to that moment where I was able to surrender and to say I need help and to go and step into this path of recovery, it really shook me that despite having addiction in my family and recovery in my family, in my immediate family, my dad's been in recovery for over 13 years. I still thought that I was different. I still thought that I didn't qualify. And I believe that is because of the stigma, because I thought that if I were to finally accept that I was an alcoholic, that I would also be saying that I was a failure, that I was a bad person, that I was hopeless. And then when I actually came to understand what an alcoholic truly was, that it wasn't any of those things that society, the stereotypes have deemed to be the case. It's not the case at all. It couldn't be further from the truth in many ways. I thought to myself, more people need to know about this. More people need to feel like they are safe to be able to step out from behind the smile, because I truly believe that so many of us are hiding behind this smile, whether you identify with being an addict or not. Many people are in jobs that they don't love. They're in relationships that they're not fulfilled in. It doesn't really matter what it is, but we put on these smiles, pretending to everyone like everything's okay, because to take the mask off and to be truly vulnerable is such a scary thing for so many people. So by creating Behind the Smile, by putting my face forward and saying, I identify as an alcoholic and this is what it can look like, and then having so many incredible guests come onto the show to share their stories, episode by episode, I hope that we are chipping away at that rock of stigma so that in time to come, this just becomes a much more normalized conversation, which I think is slowly happening.
It's happening. It's happening.
Yeah.
What specific incident happened that made you realize or helped you realize, whoa, I am an alcoholic?
Hmm. For me, it was a really slow journey to get here. As I mentioned, I was really good at keeping it together. So I didn't have any of the yets starting to occur. I wasn't losing anything. But as I mentioned, inside, I was slowly dying. And in 2018, I had somebody very close to me, my brother-in-law. He passed away. He actually took his own life. And that was really rattling for me. And at the time, I remember thinking, I don't know how I'm going to be able to process this grief, not only for me, but for my husband. He lived with us. We were very close. And it was such a shock. And so I turned to the bottle. I'd always been a big drinker, as I mentioned, but that's when I became a daily drinker. And so for 2 years, I was dependent on alcohol. I was dependent on alcohol to numb out from reality. And then by the end, I'd become physically dependent as well as emotionally dependent. And what really happened for me was my rock bottom wasn't necessarily this one moment. I can identify the date. It was the 14th of February, 2020. And what happened was I went out that night. I was actually in Melbourne at the time, living in Sydney, but I'd traveled down to Melbourne for work. And I was staying with my family for the weekend so that I could catch up with people. And I went out on the Friday night telling my mum, who I was staying with, that I was just going out for one drink. And Tim, when I tell this story, I honestly, hand on heart, say that if you'd put me on a lie detector in that moment, I would have passed with flying colors, because my intention was truly to go out for one drink.
Right.
Now, I'm an alcoholic.
Right.
I don't just have one drink. And I basically walked through the door the next morning at 9 a.m., having had a lot more than one drink and a lot more other substances. And it was actually the look on my mum's face that just cut through me. Like, it's a feeling I still struggle to describe. The pain, the disappointment, the hopelessness. And I knew in that moment that it was up to me to make this change. My ex-husband now, we were still together at the time. He'd gone to India by this stage to work on his own recovery journey. And I remember thinking at the time when he was leaving, this is great because when you leave Australia, I will be able to manage my drinking, because I was blaming him for everything. I was blaming him for the way my relationship with alcohol. Always blamed people, places, and things.
Right.
Never taking accountability. And I remember in that moment looking at my mum and I thought, the problem is me. Like, I am the problem and I am the solution. Like, I have to be willing to make a change. And so that was the day I decided to go to rehab. I checked in a week later, which is why my sobriety date is the 24th of February. And I haven't had a drink or a drug since.
Wow. So you're one of those one-timers.
Yes and no. It's funny. When I was in my early days, I mean, I'm still early at 3.5 years in many ways, but when I was in my very early days, I used to always convince myself that I was one of these unicorns that went in and never drank again. But I have to be honest, I had attended a handful of AA meetings prior to that stint in rehab, because what would happen is, say, that decade prior to 2020, I would every now and then, maybe once or twice a year, I would really burn my life to the ground as a result of my drinking. And I would say and do things, wake up with the guilt, shame, and remorse that was suffocating. Like, I wanted the world to open up and swallow me whole. And I would often reach out to my dad in those moments of crisis, and he would very lovingly extend his hand and say, why don't we go to a meeting, sweetie? And I remember I would go to these meetings, but I would basically just sit there shrouded in shame, so much so, this armor that I talk about, I was so heavily coated in armor that nothing could get in. I couldn't actually receive the message. I had cotton wool in my ears, and all I was thinking about was me. So I kind of feel like, yes, sort of, I got it the first time from rehab, but yeah, I did go to a handful of meetings, and unfortunately, like, I wasn't ready to hear the message at that time.
Yeah, you were ready when you were ready.
Exactly right. And I know that can be so hard for people, particularly loved ones of an addict, who they just so desperately want them to be able to get it, but we're all ready in our own time. And that's something that I don't think anyone else can really influence or change.
But you didn't even really try. You didn't even try until 2020, though, right? I mean,
Correct.
you went
Absolutely.
to a couple of meetings, which I would say, I mean, that's when your recovery journey really started. Was when you first
Yeah.
started going to these meetings, even though you weren't even close. Which, on that note, so I got sober. When I really got sober, it was just one time.
Yeah.
However, I remember when I was married, and my now ex-wife, she said, let's go to couples counseling. And so we go to this couples counselor. I think it's a couples counselor. And then next thing you know, we start talking about my drinking. And I'm like, why are we talking about my drinking? I thought we were going to talk about our relationship and why she's wrong and I'm right.
Can relate.
Yeah. And so we have this conversation, and she says, well, you're not an alcoholic. I'm like, no, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm fine. I just like to drink. And she said, okay, well, why don't you stop for 90 days? And I was like, sure, no problem. 90 days, I can do that. And I remember I stopped for 90 days. And then she's like, who knows, maybe you'll stop forever. And I'm like, no, don't go that far. No.
Yeah.
But it was actually Gene Collins, who was like the director of workshops at the Meadows. And it was before she was at the Meadows. She had a little counseling office in Arcadia, which is where I live. And so, yeah, that was, and then I opened up Camelback Recovery, and I don't know, it was probably 3 or 4 or 5 years sober. And I remember going out to the Meadows and connecting with her. And it's like, she was really kind of the first one that introduced the possibility of getting sober to me.
And can I ask, Tim, when you did that 90 days, was that for you confirmation that you weren't an alcoholic? Because I know I would do those sort of 30-day stints, and then I'd think, see, I told you guys, like, if I was an alcoholic, I wouldn't have been able to do that. Meanwhile, I've white knuckled the whole, like, crossing the days off the calendars. I'm obsessing, like,
Yeah.
it's not
I was,
comfortable.
Okay, but this is, and I realized this after the fact too. I actually got a hold of some pills. So I was sober, but I was taking like somehow I got a hold of Vicodin. So I was taking Vicodin or Norco or something like that. So I was taking pills. So yeah, I was sober from alcohol, but I was taking
Yeah.
pills.
Yeah.
And there was no part of me that was going to go to an AA meeting. There was no part of me that was going to really consider staying sober. I just wasn't ready.
Yeah. That's the whole thing, right? Everybody's journey looks different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And there's I got Brandon Lee, who's the owner of Art of Our Soul, which is where we do our art therapy. He relapsed at 11 years sober, and it was
Mm.
a 7-hour relapse.
Mm.
And his story, I really like the way he talks about it, because he relapsed for 7 hours, and he's like, "You're telling me that I'm sober for 11 years. I do all of this work. I'm going to AA meetings every single day. I'm sponsoring guys. I've worked the steps. I'm connected. And you're telling me that I got to start over?" He's like, "That just doesn't make sense." And I agree with him. It's not like you're starting. So that's one of the things that I don't know if I don't totally agree with, starting over, because like Brandon Lee, what he says is, "I've been in recovery since 2010." So as
Yeah.
opposed to my sobriety date it's I've been in recovery since. And I
Mm.
really like framing it that way.
I think there's so much power though in acknowledging the slip. Like I always have so much respect. There's an old timer in Sydney who he relapsed on one beer.
Right, right.
He had about 20 years. Now he's got another 20 years.
Okay.
And he IDs with his sobriety date, but he also includes that, I came in at this time, and he shares the story. And I think there's so much power in acknowledging the slip so that other people know that if it happens to them, they can come back. Because I think the stigma around relapse is, I'm a failure. I can't even get this right. I won't be welcomed back. And yet I find somebody who can go out there, realize that it ain't all that. The research
Right,
is done.
right,
They come back in, and then they get another 2 decades up. And I'm just like, wow, this stuff must really work.
right. I don't disagree with that. What I also know is that someone that relapses, the sooner they can admit that they relapsed, the sooner they can come clean, the better off they're
Mm,
going to be. Because I've seen it happen so many times where somebody relapses, they don't want to, they don't tell anybody. They're
mm.
still they're drinking, they're taking pills, they're going to meetings, they're celebrating birthdays, and I mean, it gets worse the longer they keep it to themselves. So sharing,
Yeah.
opening up and sharing it, I think is imperative to someone's
Abs-
journey.
Absolutely, Tim. And it's so funny. This is so topical, actually, and relevant to my story and my family's story. Remember how I mentioned that my dad's been in recovery for 13 years?
Uh-huh.
He had
Yeah.
a bust during COVID.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
So technically 10
Right.
years, then back, then a relapse, and then
Yeah.
back again.
Yeah.
But you don't lose the knowledge that you
No.
gained from all of
No.
those years of
It's
consistently
part of the
showing up and doing the what. Yeah.
it's part of the journey. It's
Yeah.
like, relapse is part of the story for most people.
Mm,
And
exactly.
it's like, you're just moving forward one step at a time. You slip up, okay, then get back on the train and keep on going.
And I think like for me personally, one of the reasons why I'm so grateful that I haven't relapsed, and I always touch wood and I always pray on that, is that I hear that the door gets smaller and smaller and
Mhm.
smaller, meaning it gets harder and harder and harder every time to come back in.
Right. Yeah,
Mhm.
I've heard that too. So why do you think you've been able to stay sober and you have not relapsed?
Look, it's a really interesting one. I had the gift of desperation, which we hear commonly. I honestly, there was no way I could go back to living the life that I lived. It was just too painful. And for me, it wasn't just the damage I had done to myself, but the damage, the ripple effect of my drinking and my behavior and the people that I loved that I was hurting. So when I went into rehab, it's funny. I actually still on my way there thought that I was going to learn how to drink like a lady because I hadn't
Mhm.
yet
Yeah. All right.
accepted or admitted that I was an alcoholic. That happened about 10 days in. And I was sitting in an AA meeting when that happened. And the identification and the realization was actually such a weight lifted off my shoulders, because I actually, for the first time, had hope, which was so powerful. The second thing that happened was I realized there was a solution, but it was explained to me really clearly that the solution was on offer if I was willing to do the work. And I had to be willing to do all of the work. Like, I couldn't just cherry pick the parts of the program that I liked or that I
Right.
wanted to do.
Right.
And so I was a very good student. Now, this is partly because I am also a perfectionist and I have a type A personality. It worked in my favor in this
Mhm.
case. And I was desperate for my sponsor to like me. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I did everything I was told to do. Now, I went to a rehab in Sydney, Australia, which is actually modeled off the Meadows. So we
Okay.
use Pia Mellody's developmental model of immaturity.
Okay.
So
Uh-huh.
I had all of this knowledge, and then I had 12 step, which was able to really support me coming out. Now, the other interesting thing was I got out of rehab. I was in there for 3 weeks as an inpatient, and then I came out, and a week later the world shut down because of
Okay.
COVID.
Yeah, yeah. Mhm.
So
Woo,
I did
man.
my first yeah, so I did
Nice.
my first year of recovery on Zoom. And
Wow.
people ask, they're like, "How did you go with that?" Honestly, Tim, I didn't know any different.
Mhm.
So in many ways, I found it quite convenient because I was able to do an 8 a.m. meeting, then be on not even move from my chair and be on my laptop working. So
Mhm.
I found that that was actually a positive because I was able to implement recovery into my life without it being too difficult in the way of, I didn't have to get in the car and drive somewhere and all that kind of stuff. The downside was that I really missed that side of the triangle, which is all about unity and connection.
Mhm.
That was really challenging, but I was able to have a meeting at the palm of my hands at any hour of the day. So, to answer your question, why have I not relapsed? Well, I really have done everything that I've been told, and I haven't questioned my sponsor once. I went through the steps within my first 12 months. I did them again. I changed sponsors and did them again in my second year. And I've really thrown myself in the middle of 12 steps. So I sponsor women, I do service, I have a home group, like all the things. And
Right.
my life today is very surrounded by recovery. And that is coming from somebody who really resisted this stuff. Like, I didn't think that I was going to like it, want it, any of that. I was sort of, especially the connection part of things, I was like, don't get too close to me. Like, I was so terrified of letting people truly see me. And nowadays, like, I'm in a relationship with someone who's in recovery. My
Mhm.
friends are all in recovery. Like, it's a beautiful, beautiful existence. So I feel safer in the middle, if
Did
that makes sense.
you so now what being in the middle, being connected makes me think of intimacy. I don't know about you, but before I got clean and sober and before, I mean, being in the 12 steps, working with my sponsor, going to meetings, be learning how to be vulnerable.
Mm,
I learned intimacy in the rooms of AA. And
mm,
before AA, I thought intimacy was sex, which
mhm,
is a form of intimacy, but that's sexual intimacy and just intimacy. I learned it. I mean, I learned how to be intimate with other men, and I
mm,
learned, which is vulnerability, which is opening up. And that's one of the gifts that I received early on being in
mm.
recovery. I don't know about you, but it kind of sounds like maybe that was one of the gifts for you too. I don't know. I'm just
Yeah, definitely, Tim. I never had too much of an issue with women. I'd always been a girl's girl, but I do hear time and time again women that come in that don't have that experience, that are afraid of other women. And I think 12 step is a beautiful environment to learn how to trust. And I
Mhm.
love that you included vulnerability in that intimacy piece, because I don't think you can have one without the other. And
Right.
what 12 step has allowed me to do is to remove the mask and to truly be seen, to allow myself to be vulnerable. And in doing so, I have actually figured out who I am. And I've connected to the authentic Ash, not the Ash that was putting on a show or being a personality that you wanted me to be. I actually show up now as I am in any given moment. And when somebody asks me today, "How are you, Ash?" If I'm not traveling great, I say so.
Right.
And that for me in the past, absolutely not. It was like, I'm amazing. I'm so busy. I'm this, I'm that, I'm here, I'm there. Like it was all for show. And
Hmm.
nowadays, like, sure, I still have great days like that, but I also don't have great days like that. And so I allow people to see me as I really am, that's been a huge shift in recovery.
Well, I think on that note, and I can relate because it's always, oh, how, how's it going? Great. I'm doing great. Yeah, things are great. Go Dodgers. But being in recovery, because I still have to have a filter because there's still,
Mm-mm.
and for example, instead of I'm doing great, it's things are shaping up.
Mm. Mm.
I had a really rough morning, but things, I'm on the other side of it and things are looking better.
I
So
love that. Yeah.
I kind of like I've learned to frame things that way as opposed to, yeah, good, great, always.
Yeah, because that's the other thing, isn't it? That there's the opposite, which is where people just come in and emotionally dump on you. You ask someone
Right,
how are you? And then all of a
right,
sudden you're stuck there for 30 minutes, like
right,
in a corner going, oh.
right. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty optimistic. I like to be positive. I do have my times where I'm not great.
Mm,
However, I try, like, I want to get away from being not great. And the way to get away from not being great is like, hey, things are looking up. That's what I've learned to
totally.
do. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like, well, where you focus your attention, that's where you're going to go,
Right.
right?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And I like what you said about taking suggestions because that's my experience too.
Mm,
And when I talk to people, it's like, hey, what's your biggest suggestion? Take suggestions. Like
yes.
your best thinking got you where you are today. So just realize that you just gotta, not really think about it. Just take suggestions from people that
Mm,
are where you want to be, and
mm,
that has worked wonders for me. And I got sober in 2011, and I went to one or two meetings a day. I sponsor guys. I went to the meeting before the meeting. I went to the meeting after the meeting. I mean, my whole life was surrounded, like everything I did was recovery. It's not like that today, but when my first few years,
mm,
that's what worked for me. That's what I needed because my thinking, it's like we have to become reprogrammed. We have to learn how to live life differently. And
mm,
everything has to change.
mm.
Eating habits, new sleeping habits, new exercise habits. You develop a morning routine, you pray, you meditate, eating good quality food, getting enough sleep, like all the things.
Mm, mm. It all allows you to grow into the person that you were born to be. I think like somewhere along the way we get taken off track and our course redirects. And
Mhm,
then until we get into recovery, we kind of just like, I always talk about it as like life just sort of happens to you rather than happening for you.
mhm.
And when we get into recovery, we get to become the director of our own lives again. And that includes a complete shift in the way that we think and the way that we react and handle life. And from what we put into our body to, like you said, getting enough sleep, all of that is so important. Like yesterday, I went and got live blood testing done.
Right,
Like
right.
now I never would have done that sort of thing when I was out there drinking. Like I didn't care. But now
Right.
I'm like, oh, I want to know everything. I want to know how healthy is my blood. Like
Mhm,
it's
mhm.
kind of cool. Like we get to just have this deep connection to ourselves.
Right, and you get to connect with nature, you go for walks on the beach with friends and your dog. I mean, like, those are the amazing things that we get to do being in recovery, as opposed to, and I don't know about you, but it's like for me, it's hit snooze 5 times and run out the door as I'm late to my first meeting or whatever.
Mhm. Mhm. Oh yeah. Yep, that hamster wheel.
Right. What is holistic transformation?
Mm. Holistic transformation is all about the connection between mind, body, and spirit. So for me, getting clean and sober was essential for me to be able to do the deeper inner work. And that's because I was using alcohol in particular, but drugs were a part of my story as well. I was using alcohol as a way to numb out and to avoid emotion. And because I'd been doing that since the age of 12, I was actually incapable of really processing emotion. And so a lot of trauma had been stuck in my body and I had really maladaptive coping skills, and it just wasn't serving me. And what I came to realize once I had removed the alcohol from my life was that I had some stuff to look at and some stuff to process. And I wasn't necessarily living in congruence with my values. I knew where I wanted to be, but I was still a little unclear on how to get there. And so I had to look at it from a mind, body, spirit approach. And so through the fundamentals of yoga and meditation and all of the therapy that I've done and different modalities, breath work, all of this kind of stuff, that's where I developed this holistic transformation model. And what we do when we look at this is we look at the three sides, so mind, body, spirit. And each side has a different intention. So the first thing I do when I'm working with people is we look at how to remove the armor. So as children, we develop coping mechanisms, which I like to describe as invisible armor. And so every time you have a trauma, now this doesn't have to be a big trauma, things like sexual assault or physical violence, which are terrible. They can be, but they could also be micro traumas. They could be things like, for me, it was my parents not coming home when they said they were going to come home. Different uncertainties, not feeling safe, growing up in an alcoholic home. They create these micro traumas. And so I'm putting on sheets of armor that are invisible. It could even be your teacher embarrassing you in the classroom. Like that could be a micro trauma. And so we reach adulthood. And if you can imagine this visually, it's like we're all walking around in these medieval armor suits. You've got the chest plate on, you've got the helmet on, you've got the chain metal over your eyes, and this armor is weighing you down. Now, not only is it weighing you down, but it's preventing you from allowing people to get in, and it's preventing you from connecting with your heart. Like no one's getting through that armor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're not ever taught how to remove the armor. So that's what we do with this holistic transformation work. We look at removing the armor. And the way you do that, in a nutshell, the first thing you have to do is you have to create awareness. What are the things that I use on a daily basis or maybe a weekly basis to disconnect from reality and to not feel uncomfortable emotions? Now, for some of us, and I imagine for many of your listeners, this will be to drink or to take drugs or previously. However, it could be shopping, it could be gambling, it could be relationships, promiscuity, it could be anything. So we have to get really clear on that.
Looking at Facebook, looking at Instagram, looking at TikTok.
1000%. Yes, exactly right. You've got it. So we have to become aware, because unless you are aware of something, you can't make a change. Like nothing changes if nothing changes. We have to become aware. Then we have to have acceptance. Then there's hope. It's exactly what my experience with my own journey to identifying as an alcoholic. Once we do that, we look at the shame stories that we have collected throughout our lives, because I truly believe it is almost impossible to reach your adult years without having some toxic shame that's rubbed off on you throughout your life. A lot of the time, not always, this has been modeled behavior from your primary caregiver. So we call out the shame stories and we get really clear that the shame that we're carrying is not ours, and we hand that back over. And then the third and final thing that we do in learning how to remove the armor is to learn how to question your conditioned thoughts. So you know how when you have a thought, it comes from your voice, right? And it's often really, really loud. So it's quite convincing.
Yeah.
But something that I've learned in recovery is that, and I'm sure you've heard this before, Tim, is that I'm not responsible for my first thought, but I am responsible for my second.
Right.
So what we do in learning how to question those conditioned thoughts is we practice the pause, that beautiful moment in time between a reaction and a response, where we can actually go, that's a funny thought. I wonder why my brain's telling me that. Yeah. Is that because my brain is working off an old survival mechanism and it's basing its thoughts off old incidences, old experiences, and it's trying to protect me? Yeah, okay. Is that the reality today? Well, no, it's not. So I don't actually need to listen to that or take action on that, because it's simply not true. So that's just a taste of one side of the triangle. Then there's the energetic clearing, which looks at more at like the physical body, which involves meditation and breath work and stillness, learning how to sit in the shit, as I like to describe it, getting
Right.
comfortable with being uncomfortable. And then the final side of the triangle, which is this holistic transformation model, is all about unlocking the human you were born to be. So, really connecting deeply with that authenticity and getting off the hamster wheel. And the way we do that is we look at fear, because fear is, in my experience, it underpins so much of our lives and holds us back from so many experiences and relationships and everything, really. We got to clear the fear. The second thing we do is we look at non-attachment, which is a beautiful yogi principle where it's all about, rather than holding on to life, trying to strangle life or living life in a straitjacket, we let go and we accept the impermanence of life. And from this place, you can just be so much more free. And then finally, it's developing that connection with something greater than you. Now, this is something that is introduced in 12-step as well. So anybody that's gone through 12-step will be really familiar with this. Some people call it God, some people call it the ocean, some people have it as a loved one that's passed on. It doesn't really matter. The only thing I really try to help people to understand is that there is something out there that is bigger than you.
Right.
And that's so unique to everybody. Everybody's own experience looks different in that. But that all together is the holistic transformation model.
I love it. I love it. There's so many things that you said. I was biting my tongue over here. There's so many things that you said that I loved, which pause when agitated or doubtful. That's one
Mm,
of the most powerful things that I've learned is to pause and don't react and don't be impulsive and just play the tape forward, whatever I need
mm.
to do to not react and make a decision. I mean, I can tell you that my decisions are way better when I just sit on them for a little bit. And I've
Yeah.
learned to sit on decisions and not say, it's like, don't send that email, don't send that text,
Yes.
don't say that thing, like don't make that comment. It's always just let me sit on it for a minute. And then always 100% of the time, I usually say something that's way more appropriate. Because I don't know about you, I don't like making amends. And it,
Oof.
oof. And I know that's when I lie, cheat, steal, when I say things that are hurtful, that's when that creates the guilt and the shame. And then I have to make amends. And if I don't make amends, then I'm carrying around this guilt and shame. Then I'm uncomfortable.
Mm.
Then I'm restless, irritable, discontent. Then I need a solution. The solution be a drink, a drug, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, something to where I can numb out and not really feel those feelings.
Yeah, you've described it perfectly, right? And it's like it's all in the pause. Like if we just take the pause, then that prevents the reaction, which then creates the chaos, which we then have to go and clean up. Like, let's
Mm,
just not take the reckless action in the first place. And life is a
right.
lot more simple.
Right. And what was your first step in creating this holistic transformation model? I love it. And I know that you've grabbed bits and pieces from different, I mean, like I can relate to a lot of it. I mean, like yoga, I started doing
Mm.
yoga I was probably 3 or 4 months sober when I started doing yoga. And it's been a huge compliment to my recovery. Breath
Mm.
work, prayer, meditation, morning routine. Again, we're going to get to the morning routine. But all of those things, I believe, it's not just my experience, is just going to meetings is not like that. That's not going to do it. That'll work in the short term. But if you really want to be happy, joyous, and free, there's so many other things that have to happen. And
I completely
that's been my
agree.
experience.
And I love that you said, it's not really just one thing. I go to meetings to get that sense of relief. I get identification in a meeting. I almost describe it as like if there was a power cord coming out of my soul and then like getting to plug into something, to plug into God, to plug into my high power, like I get to plug in at a meeting.
Mm,
And the energy vibration in a meeting is something that is indescribable. And every time I go to a meeting, every single time, I leave feeling better than I did before. Now, I may not be flying or like high fiving, I may still be flat, but there is an increase in my overall energy level. So vital, super important to my recovery. But what I've come to realize is that when I removed alcohol from my life, which took up such a huge part of my life, I had to then fill that hole with other things. If we're talking about the spiritual malady, that hole in the soul, it was getting filled with booze. You remove the booze, the hole for me was still there. So I had to start to find different things to fill it with. And that's where, like you touched on, yoga and meditation became part of my life in a big way. I trained to become a yoga teacher after my first year of recovery. And now yoga was something that I dipped my toe into while I was still drinking, but I never really connected with the practice because I was unable to connect. I had all this armor on and I was drinking every day. So when I was able to truly connect with the practice of yoga and to get the spiritual experience that you can get when you're in yoga and living life in yoga, it's not just about the physical poses.
Mm-hmm.
That was an absolute game changer for me. Exercising, therapy, connection, like all of it plays a part, and all of it they've all become non-negotiables in my life. Like I'm really quite committed and dedicated to doing the things that I know are going to support my recovery, because my recovery has to come first. Because if it doesn't come first, anything else I'm putting ahead of it isn't going to be there in the long run. Like that's the reality for me.
Right. What are the steps to cultivating a deeper connection with self?
Well, that would be the transformation model, holistic approach. So, like I was saying, as long as we are carrying armor and we have this messy energy, we can't connect in with ourselves. I truly believe that we all have the answers already in us. It's called your intuition. But when you're drowning that out literally with alcohol or any other substance, or like we said before, it could be social media, it could be shopping. When you're sort of pushing it down, it doesn't let the intuition flow. Your connection to self is blocked. So we have to remove the blockages to clear the channel that then creates this beautiful line of communication from head to heart. So things like meditation are beautiful for this, because what meditation allows us to do is cultivate stillness. I always describe the mind as the ocean. And when the ocean is really choppy, you can't see down to the bottom of the floor bed, right? The mind is exactly the same. When we have a lot of busyness, there's things to do. Maybe it's the kids' school lunches, maybe it's a shopping list, maybe it's work meetings, like whatever it is, you've got all of this stuff darting around your brain, taking up space in your mind. For you to then have an intuitive, clear thought come through, like that's going to be really, really difficult. Whereas if you can create space in the mind, whether that be a 10-minute guided meditation in the morning, or maybe you prefer to do a meditation practice of an evening, but you dedicate that time to create space in the mind will naturally find stillness. And that's when I find in those moments, that's when my most clear, intuitive thoughts come to me. But it's not only that, it has this beautiful flow on effect where I then throughout the day am able to tap into that intuition a lot more.
Love it.
Mm.
I was thinking about awareness, and you said this earlier, and I forgot. I've heard in the past 90% of transformation is awareness.
Mm-hmm. So true.
Or the first step in transformation is awareness. I like both of them, but I agree. 90% of transformation is awareness, and cultivating a deeper connection with yourself. Like you have to have the awareness, and I know lots of people they're even people that are not alcoholics or drug addicts. They completely lack awareness. And I can tell, and I can see it because I have a very high level of awareness. So I can, even just in conversation and people that I know pretty well, it's like, man, there's just a complete lack of awareness.
And this is really where I find so much passion in the work that I do. I was just chatting to my best friend about this when we were on our 6 a.m. walk this morning. Is the hardest thing or the biggest barrier is this lack of awareness. Because once you become aware of the work that needs to be done, you can start to do the work and you get this beautiful expansion and this beautiful experience and this connection to self like you've never known before. But I would say, like, most people, maybe 8 out of 10, are walking around not even realizing that they're disconnected.
Hmm.
So it's like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. That kind of mentality.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I mean, I'll always say the day I realized I was an alcoholic was one of the greatest days of my life because all of a sudden there was a solution.
Right. I'm also thinking about breathing. Most people don't even know how to breathe. Most people walk
Mm,
around with very shallow breaths. 8 out of 10,
mm,
I would say.
mm.
8 out of 10 people are walking around with shallow breaths. 8 out of 10 people lack awareness. And I think you have to have awareness in order to even know how to breathe. So breath
Yes,
work can be a pathway to awareness.
absolutely. Breath work has changed my life. I see the most beautiful breathwork practitioner here in Melbourne. Her name's Amy Marie. And the breakthroughs I've had with her, because I've spent many, many, many hours in therapy.
Uh-huh.
And that has been profound. And I am eternally grateful for the work that I've done with my therapist. But I was finding that there was still stuff that was stuck in my body. And I knew that it was trauma. And it wasn't until I started doing breath work that I would be in these sessions screaming. Like the sounds that were coming out from my body were like this guttural grief that I don't know whether that was coming from childhood. I don't know whether that was coming from the experiences I've had in adulthood that have been traumatic. It could have been any of them. But the fact was that was still stuck in my body. And met so many times for so many people, we're unconscious of it. Now, when you're unconscious, like we were saying with awareness, how can you treat something or look at something or talk about something that you're not aware of? But the breath doesn't lie. The breath takes
Mhm.
over and it will bring up what you allow to come up. So, yeah, huge, huge fan of breath work and definitely recommend it.
Absolutely. Tell me about your morning routine.
Yes, I love my morning routine. And look, I remember in the first 12 months of my recovery, this was so spot on. I never missed a beat,
Right,
but we
right.
were also in lockdown and there wasn't a lot happening.
Right, right.
I'm as a yoga practitioner, I teach a lot of mornings, and so I get up at 4:30 anyway. So trying to get up an hour before that is kind of so
Mhm.
I'll be honest, sometimes my morning routine happens mid-morning or even afternoon. So that's my first caveat. But what my morning routine looks like on a perfect day is I wake up in the morning, I get my feet on the ground, and the first thing I do is I just take a moment to check in and to think about the day ahead. And that was something that I learned in 12 step. They call it on awakening. And that's really important for me because if I don't do that, I can go straight into spiral the minute I wake up. Like I have such an active mind and I start thinking about everything that I've got to do. What do I need to control? Like I can be
Right.
off. So I get myself up and I've got this chair in the living room, which is my meditation chair. I light some incense and then I sit down and I meditate. Now, this can vary from a guided meditation to an unguided meditation. Sometimes I do 20 minutes just completely silent with my mantra. It really depends. It depends how much time I've got and what my day looks like and what I'm needing. So I just want to stress with meditation as well, because I know a lot of people can find meditation to be quite overwhelming or quite daunting. You can start small. You could start with just a 2-minute guided meditation if you
Mhm.
wanted to. I actually have some free guided meditations on my website that people can check out. If you just DM me the word meditate on Instagram, then I can send that over to you. So I find that that's a really helpful way just to start the day. And then what I'm doing is, as we were talking about before, that stillness, that's what I'm creating in that moment. Then I always pray once I've finished meditating. I write a gratitude list and then I go and move my body. And I find when I do those 4 things, I set myself up for the best day possible because I'm entering my day as the best version of myself.
I love it. And how long does that take you?
So I would say anywhere from 20 minutes to half an hour.
Okay. There's a guy named Hal Elrod, The Miracle Morning. Do you know who that is? So
I've
he
heard
has
of him. Yes.
okay, so yeah, and I had him on my podcast as well, and he does the Miracle
Amazing.
Morning, and the acronym is SAVERS: silence, affirmations, visualize, exercise, and read and scribe. So scribe
I
instead of
love
write.
that.
So scribe. So those are the and he says you can do it in 5 minutes. You can do it in 6 minutes. You do 1 minute each. I mean, so
Mm,
even if you don't have 30, 20 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour, I like to take an hour. I mean, on an
mm,
ideal day, I
mm.
take an hour to do all of my stuff. And I just love it. I love it. I mean, and to your point, like I'll wake up. I don't like waking up in the threes, but I do,
Yeah.
but I wake up at 4 o'clock many days throughout the week. I try to sleep in until at least five, but
Yeah.
I would way rather get less sleep and take my time to get grounded and get myself
Mm,
off to a good day. And
yeah.
even if I don't give myself an hour, even if I give myself like tomorrow, or on Saturday morning, I'm doing the Grand Canyon rim to rim to rim. I'll need to leave at 4. So I think I'm gonna be up at 3:15
Woo.
or so. So I'll do a version of my morning practice because it's that important for me to get started off on the right foot.
Oh, I completely agree, and I love what you said about, like, it can be as much or as little time as you have, but as long as you commit to doing it. Like, I also
Yeah.
have my journal sitting next to my meditation chair, and if I have the space and time to be able to journal in the morning, I'll do that as well. But there
Yeah.
are many days where I don't, and that doesn't mean I say to myself, "Well, I'm not gonna bother doing it because I don't have time to journal." It's like you do
Right.
what you can, and you
Right.
just adjust and amend, but creating that time and also just like showing up for yourself. Like, what a great way to start the day. We spend so many years in active addiction, breaking lies, breaking promises, not showing up for ourselves. This daily practice is a way of actually saying to yourself every morning, like, I see you, I love you, you're valuable, you're worthy.
Right. What role does yoga and meditation play in your recovery?
So, as we just spoke about meditation, like meditation has been such an incredible practice to create stillness in my mind and to practice the pause. And then for yoga, well, yoga's twofold because as I mentioned before, there's the asana, there's the physical practice, which has been really instrumental in helping me to connect in with my body. And I have to say, I have a love and a respect for my body these days that I never had before. As a teenager, I struggled with disordered eating. I was always comparing myself to everyone else. I never felt good in my own body. And now I really do see my body as a vessel, as a channel. Like, it's something that I want to take care of and that I want to nurture and that I want to look after. Like, I really value my body and what I put into it these days. And that has come through the practice of yoga. And then just the principles around yoga, like such a truthfulness. Like, I live an honest life these days. I actually cannot lie anymore. Like, really, I get
Right. Right.
so uncomfortable telling white
Right.
lies.
Yeah.
My partner, who's also in recovery and works a program, it's the same thing. So we have a very honest household.
Right.
Aparigraha, non-attachment, like, it's so
Mm,
instrumental. Ahimsa, non-violence, all of the yamas and niyamas, all of the 8 limbs of yoga I try to incorporate in my life. And it's just allowed me to live from a place of deep grounding and authenticity, which is so far from the person that I once was.
right. Right. The principles of yoga are aligned with the 12 steps in a big way. And I mean, like any yoga studio I go to, I can pretty much bet that probably 30% of the people in that class are in recovery, which is
Yeah.
it's a comfortable place to be.
Definitely. Yeah, it is. I could not believe. I remember sitting in my teacher training because I got sober and then became a yoga teacher.
Okay.
And I was looking around and no one else was in recovery in my group,
Okay.
in my
Yeah.
cohort. And I was like, this is amazing. I just couldn't believe the
Yeah. Right. Right.
similarities and the alignment. And it's beautiful. It's so reaffirming.
Right. Okay, we're coming to the end of the interview. Is there a question that you wanted me to ask you today? If so, what is it?
Oh, is there a question that I wanted? I think. We've covered some really good stuff. I'm glad that thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about the holistic transformation work. It is my passion. It is my life's work. And I think that as we touched on before, it's not just for people who are in recovery from addiction. I do think that most of us are trying to check out, to numb, or avoid in some way. So I'm really glad that we were able to talk about that. I think just for anybody that's listening who maybe is at the beginning of their journey and doesn't know what to do next or where to start, if they're feeling really overwhelmed, the first thing I would say is that reaching out to somebody is probably the most powerful thing you can do. I remember when I started this, before I got into recovery, like I thought I had to figure this out. I thought that because of the shame and the stigma associated with the journey that I was on, that I was a F up, a bad person. And none of that is true. No, anyone listening today, you are not a failure. You are not a bad person. Recovery is there to be done together. And so I really urge people to reach out, whether it's on Instagram, you can send me a message. Like if anyone wants to connect, I'm always open to talking. If you want to chat about doing holistic transformation work, again, just send me a message and we can jump on a call. But I think just knowing that you don't have to do this alone, when we isolate, when we disconnect, that's when we stay on the hamster wheel. The moment that you ask, you put your hand up and you ask for help, like there is a beautiful life that is beyond your wildest dreams, that is just over there. It is not far away, but we're all here to guide each other. I think it's one of the most supportive communities I've ever known.
Definitely. I actually have another question for you. Who is your ideal client? Who's your ideal client? Who should seek out your services? Who should look into the holistic transformation model?
Yeah. So somebody that I think gets a lot of benefit from working with me is somebody who is ready to go from striving to thriving. So maybe you've started your recovery journey and you realize that, I'll tell you my own story. I remember waking up at a year sober, looking around and going, I didn't actually want any of this. Like I was living in a city that I didn't want to live in. I was in a relationship that I didn't want to be in. And I was working in a job that I didn't want to be in. Now I've moved cities. I'm no longer in that relationship and I've left corporate. So all of these things that I got to choose, but it was so overwhelming in the beginning to know where to start. And I wish that I had had someone who had the experience, who'd walked before me, who could guide me. And that's what I'm offering to people to help, by going through these sides of the triangle, removing the armor, clearing energy, and then really becoming the person you were born to be. You can step into your purpose, to step into your truth and really create that life that is beyond your wildest dreams.
Does it matter where they're located, or is it all virtual?
Absolutely not. No, we do all of our sessions online, which is, I guess one of the amazing things that has come out of the last few years. So anywhere in the world, you can hit me up.
Okay, amazing. And your Instagram handle is?
It's at Ash Butterss. So that's BUTTERSS.
Okay, awesome. Okay, well, that does it with our time with Ash Butterss. Ash, thank you so much. I enjoyed getting to know you. I appreciate you. Thank you for your time. And
likewise,
everyone else, thank you for watching. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of I Love Being Sober.
Thanks.
If you found this video to be of value, be sure to like it, subscribe to our channel if you want to see more videos, leave a comment if you have a question, if you've got something to say. Camelback Recovery provides treatment services for people struggling with mental health, mental illness, addiction, alcoholism. So if you or someone you know is struggling, be sure to reach out to us. You can go to our website, camelbackrecovery.com, or our information is in the comments section below. And we provide everything from detox, inpatient, outpatient treatment, sober living, recovery coaching, sober companion services. So either we'll be able to help you or we'll be able to refer you to people or treatment centers that might be a better fit. So I will see you in the next video.